Members, I wish to advise you that Mr. Speaker will not be present to open today's sitting.
He's not present.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favour, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works, begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. Introduction of guests. I recognize the member from Estevan.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you and through you, it is my pleasure to introduce 19 public service employees seated in your gallery today. They are here to take part in the parliamentary program for public service. The program includes a tour of the Legislative Building, briefings presented by various branches of the Legislative Assembly Services and Executive Council, an opportunity to sit in the Speaker's Gallery and observe the question period today, and House business. So I truly hope you enjoy that today, and we'll get an opportunity to talk about that at about 3 o'clock after that's done. Participants that we have with us today here are from the Ministries of Agriculture, Education, Environment, Finance, Government Relations, Health, Highways, Justice, Office of the Provincial Auditor, Provincial Capital Commission, Public Service Commission, Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency, and Social Services, Mr. Speaker. So I would ask all members to join me in welcoming these visitors to their Legislative Assembly.
I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join with the minister opposite and in welcoming this group of dedicated public servants to their Legislative Assembly. It's always a great day when we have the parliamentary program here today to the legislature, observing proceedings and having conversations with various officials. Looking forward to also having the opportunity to speak with them after the minister this afternoon, and I ask again all members to join me in welcoming them to their Legislative Assembly.
I recognize the member from Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, it is my pleasure to welcome my very close family friends and my constituents of Regina Northeast, Harry and Savita Sharma. One of the most popular couple in Regina community. Savita is a regular volunteer both in temples and in Mosaic in India Pavilion. Mr. Speaker, they are proud parents of Munish Sharma, whose member statement I will be giving later on. Now I will ask all members to join me in welcoming them to their assembly.
Presenting petitions. I recognize the member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am pleased to present the following petition calling for duty to consult legislation. The folks who signed this petition wish to bring to your attention the following. The Government of Saskatchewan is currently selling off and offering long-year leases on Crown lands that have been used by Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities in this province. Without clear duty to consult legislation in place, the Government of Saskatchewan alone is responsible for recognizing when the duty to consult is triggered, contributing to a lack of engagement with First Nation and Métis communities, and with little accountability for the provincial government, and often ending in lost court battles. The duty to consult legislation leaves the taxpayers of Saskatchewan footing the bill for this government's losses and mistakes in court. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to immediately stop the sell-off of Crown land and enshrine duty to consult into law by enacting the meaningful duty to consult legislation. The folks who signed this petition reside in Carlisle and Melfort. I do so present.
I recognize a member from Saskatoon, Willow Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan wish to bring to your attention the following: that the NDP Liberal federal tax on carbon continues to make life more expensive for Saskatchewan residents, that the federal Liberal NDP coalition government continues to be disingenuous with the rhetoric surrounding the carbon tax, and that according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer's analysis, most households will pay more in fuel charges and GST, as well as receiving slightly lower incomes than they will receive in climate action incentive payments. Despite promises from the federal government that the tax would remain revenue neutral and that families would benefit, the reality is that families are paying more than they receive. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action: to call upon the Government of Canada to immediately end the carbon tax and support Saskatchewan's development as a global supplier of food, fuel, and fertilizer. The below undersigned are residents of Saskatoon. I so present, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure, especially today, to rise to present a stack of our petitions calling for universal access to birth control here in Saskatchewan. The undersigned residents of the province would like to bring to our attention the following: that Saskatchewan has some of the highest rates of adolescent pregnancy in the entire country, that's youth ages 12 to 20. That cost is one of the biggest barriers to accessing contraceptive birth control in Saskatchewan, especially among adolescents, Mr. Speaker. That having consistent and affordable access to contraceptive options is essential for promoting bodily autonomy, preventing unwanted pregnancy, and saving money on sexual and reproductive health care. And finally, that sexual and reproductive health and rights are human rights, Mr. Speaker. I will read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to adopt a policy making no-cost prescription contraceptive available to all Saskatchewan people. Mr. Speaker, the petitions today have been signed by residents of Saskatoon, North Battleford, and Regina. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions. Why is the member on her feet?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for leave to introduce guests.
It's been asked for leave to do an introduction. Is leave granted? I recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I spoke to the petition today and called special attention to it as a special occasion today because we have a number of guests here in the West Gallery today who have joined us in our call for universal coverage for birth control. I would like to introduce to you, first of all, the founders of a new group in Saskatchewan, Universal Access to Contraception Saskatchewan. They are an advocacy group of medical students from the University of Saskatchewan, and they are calling for the immediate implementation of complete coverage of prescription contraception. And on this side of the aisle, we couldn't be more supportive, Mr. Speaker. I would like to welcome Adrienne Thierry, Bryn Stebbings, Kalea Rempel, Natisha Thakar, Warda Mahmood, and I would like to thank them for all their advocacy. I would also like to mention that these students would very much appreciate the opportunity to meet with the Minister of Health today to discuss this call for universal birth control coverage. Mr. Speaker, I would like to mention as well that the U of S students today are joined by Dr. Christine Lett, who is the Regina Area Department Lead of Obstetrics and Gynecology, as well as Dr. Salim Hood, a longtime abortion provider and advocate for reproductive rights based here in Regina. I hope that all members will join me in welcoming these guests to their legislature. Thank you.
I recognize the Health Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Request leave to introduce guests.
Leave has been requested to make an introduction. Is leave granted? I recognize the Health Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to welcome or join the member opposite in welcoming these students to their Legislative Assembly. I know that they had some discussions with the opposition earlier today. I'd be more than happy to sit down with them after question period and be able to discuss some of the contraception ideas that they do have. So I'd like to all members to welcome them to their Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Statements by members. I recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, recently British Columbia has announced that they will provide free contraceptives for all BC residents. It's a significant step in the right direction for reproductive rights in that province, Mr. Speaker. However, it is unacceptable that Saskatchewan has yet to take similar action, despite the fact that our Saskatchewan NDP caucus has been calling for this initiative for over a year now. Access to birth control is a fundamental human right and essential to ensuring that individuals have control over their own bodies and reproductive choices. It is time for the Sask Party to finally take action to ensure that all individuals, regardless of income or location, have access to the birth control options that they need here in Saskatchewan. It is essential that this government recognizes the importance of reproductive rights and takes concrete action to ensure that individuals have access to the resources they need to make informed decisions about their own lives. Women should not be forced to choose between filling their birth control prescription for the month and buying groceries, Mr. Speaker. The people of Saskatchewan deserve nothing less than full, barrier-free access to reproductive health care, and so I call on the Sask Party government to ensure universal, no-cost coverage of contraception today. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Kenora Pelly.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is a great day in Kenora Pelly. I want to congratulate Reagan Foster from Norquay on being selected the hometown hero. Not only has Reagan been a volunteer at multiple community events, but she also sits on a number of boards. Reagan keeps the kitchen stocked at the local communiplex. She has 4 children, helps run the family ranch near town, and owns and operates Norquay agencies. Reagan said she fell in love with the small town hospitality and wanted to return her sense by volunteering. She formed the Norquay Kin Club in 2008. Since then, the club has donated around $1.2 million to Telemiracle. Her latest initiative ensures kids from K to 12 go to school, don't go to school hungry. She states that many of the children go hungry, so she developed a breakfast program to make breakfast accessible for all kids. For those around her, the hometown hero title fits perfectly. When asked what advice she would give to others, Reagan said this: "It's pretty easy. You just have to make yourself available and let others know that you're willing to help." Thank you, Reagan Foster, for your commitment and devotion to your community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning we gathered as a community in fellowship at the Saskatchewan Prayer Breakfast, and we listened to the message from the keynote, the inspiring, the remarkable, and the legendary Carol Lafayette Boyd. I rise today to recognize Carol, a leader on so many fronts. I couldn't be more thankful to serve as her MLA, to count her as a friend, and for the force for so much good that she is in our community. Beyond leading the African Canadian Heritage Museum and Black History Month events, and being a tireless advocate for many that are vulnerable in our community, she's a world record holding and breaking athlete, all at the age of 80. This past year, at age 80, she broke 6 world records and was named the World Masters Athlete of the Year for the 2nd time in her life. And she was also awarded the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Medal, a well-deserved honor that reflects her hard work, selfless leadership, and exceptional talent. She is the true definition of athlete, citizen, change maker, and community builder in every sense, a role model and inspiration for us all. Please join me in congratulating Carol Lafayette Boyd and in thanking her for the difference she makes in our community and our province each and every day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak about Munish Sharma, writer of Number 34, Globe Theatre's premiere play last season about George Reed. Number 34 was commissioned by the Globe Theatre to coincide with the 2022 Grey Cup in Regina and to honor the man who put our capital city on the map. Munish was born and raised in Regina. He graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Performance from the University of Regina in 2006. Munish Sharma is now an actor, writer, dancer, and producer. He is a Jesse Award-nominated actor with numerous theatre, TV, stage, and burlesque productions to his credit. He is one of the creators of I Can't Believe It Is Not Butter Chicken, sketch comedy group. His first one-act play, Mrs. Singh and Me, premiered at the 2015 Vancouver Fringe Festival, where it won the Pick of the Fringe Award. Munish also received a Jesse Award nomination in 2016 for his work on Pi Theatre's production of The Invisible Hand. In 2017, Munish finished his first poetry passion project, You I Love, a series of spoken word pieces about his journey as an artist. I would like to take this time to recognize Munish Sharma for his accomplishments in the arts and for shining his stage light on Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I recognize the member from Carrot River Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Premier Tech Horticulture is an international company employing over 60 people in Carrot River Valley constituency. This year, they will celebrate their 100th anniversary. An international company with small-town values, Premier Tech harvests peat moss, which is a wide variety of uses in horticulture and agriculture, creating sustainable solutions to help feed the growing global population and beautify the world we live in. That's what they're all about. They work to improve crop performance by bringing life back into the soils. In the horticultural world, Premier Tech creates solutions that stimulate the growth of ornamental, edible, and medical plants. They also offer a variety of soils, mixes, compost, and ground covers that make gardening easier. They provide grass seed, lawn fertilizer, and spreaders that stimulate grass growth and control pests and diseases. In agriculture, they offer solutions for field and specialized crops. Premier Tech's products help to improve quality and yields, as well as a healthier and stronger plant growth and better plant resistance to stresses such as drought. Premier Tech Horticulture is an important part of the Carrot River Valley constituency as an employer and a value contributor to the community. I would like to recognize them as they look forward to celebrating their 100th anniversary this year, and I ask all members to join me in congratulating them on such an important milestone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Well done. I recognize the member from Martinsville, Warman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Yet again, we have received more great news about our economy. Saskatchewan is once again leading the nation in multiple economic indicators. Mr. Deputy Speaker, today we have seen urban housing starts increase by not 10%, not 20%, not 30%, not even 40%, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but 53% through the first 3 months of 2023 compared to the same time last year. This increase is also ranking first among the provinces. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we've said in this House many times, these indicators are further proof that Saskatchewan has the food, the fuel, and the fertilizer that the world needs. What we see under this government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is an economic record to be proud of. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's abundantly clear that Saskatchewan is the best place to live, work, and raise a family. While the members opposite talk down the positivity on this side of the House, we'll continue to be optimistic about the future of this great province. These indicators tell a real story. We're seeing international investment, job creation, and population growth that we would have never seen under the members opposite. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, on this side of the House, we'll continue to tell that story at home and around the world. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I recognize the member from Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And so ends another exciting SUMA convention. Whether you were there for the bear pit or for the many different business exhibitors that were set up, there was something for everyone. Yesterday, our government announced the investment of nearly $22 million in provincial funding toward 21 vital infrastructure projects. Included in this is the allocation of $16.5 million in provincial funding for a new event arena in Lloydminster. It will feature 2 indoor and 1 outdoor regulation-sized rinks, including sledge hockey-friendly amenities. The building will include accessible seating and washrooms for spectators and accessible dressing rooms for hockey teams. The new arena will be an inclusive and accessible space where residents can gather to enjoy sports and community events. Mr. Deputy Speaker, first I would like to thank all the volunteers and workers at Saskatoon Prairieland Park who helped to make the SUMA Convention possible. And I'd like to thank all the attendees from our various urban municipal partners for attending this year's convention and continuing to have conversations with us about what is most important for their communities. We will continue to build a stronger Saskatchewan that is home to a strong economy, strong communities, and strong families. This is growth that works for everyone.
Question period. I recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I asked the Health Minister about his government's hush memo and the culture of fear he's created in our public healthcare system. The one this government sent to frontline healthcare workers, telling them not to answer any questions and not to share any information about the true state of our hospitals. As usual, that minister downplayed, defected, denied, said healthcare workers don't have anything to fear when it comes to speaking out. If that's the case, why did the 3 nurses speaking to the CTV yesterday feel they could only do so anonymously?
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, and I categorically reject that question, Mr. Speaker. That's not what I said at all, Mr. Speaker. There was a memo that went out, part of a larger communication to all SHA employees about the process and procedures when booking for hospital tours. Mr. Speaker, what it was is a simple communication because they were getting requests from opposition members and from government members. They were clarifying policy that has been existing in place. We need to make sure that we maintain the integrity of our hospitals for privacy issues, security issues, Mr. Speaker. We need those tours to be organized. Nobody, and I will repeat this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, nobody is hushing healthcare workers' voices. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Speaker, correction. That memo was sent to Lanigan healthcare workers the morning of our planned and publicized outreach in Lanigan. A coincidence, Mr. Speaker? I think not. I can see why the Health Minister doesn't want to talk about those 3 nurses, but here's what they had to say about the state of our hospitals. Quote, we've seen a number of nurses either leave the profession or leave their position. Quote, there are 90-year-olds walking out that have paid taxes and they deserve to be in rooms and you just can't provide care for them. Quote, now we're sitting at 40 to 50 patients in the waiting room and 100 people in the department. When will the minister stop trying to silence nurses and start listening to their solutions to the crisis in our ERs?
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And for the benefit of the member opposite, I'll repeat what I said yesterday. Here's what the memo actually said, Mr. Deputy Speaker. At times during the year, the SHA gets a high number of requests of tours of our facilities from elected members of the Legislative Assembly. These can't. Mr. Deputy Speaker, they should listen to this. This is important information. These can create clinical and operational challenges if not coordinated properly. These are also opportunities for efficiency when coordinated approach is taken to these types of tours by helping avoid as much possible multiple requests of our team from different elected officials in a short time span. It continues. That is why we would ask that should a political party office and/or member of the Legislative Assembly reach out to a facility or individual directly for this type of tour, please direct them to the SHA for coordination prior to setting a date and time of officials that has requested the tour. This will help.
Next question, please. I recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, certainly ran out the clock but didn't even touch the question, and I can see why this health minister doesn't want to talk about these nurses. But they had more to say about this tired and out-of-touch government's lack of respect for healthcare workers. Quote, we elect these officials every 4 years into government, and I don't understand how it's turned around that I work for them and that I need to abide. It's backward. Quote, it's like we've got a gag order. We're cautioned nobody can speak out. Why won't the minister quit with the hush memos and the gag orders and start listening to local voices and get to work fixing our healthcare system?
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My apologies, I ran over time. I'll finish the quote. Quote, this helps us identify if there are any synergies with other tour requests for the facility or in the area to avoid disruption of effort to ensure that all parties are aware of standardized expectations of tours and the SHA facilities. Mr. Speaker, I have had the opportunity to tour ERs, not just in Regina, in Saskatoon, and all across the province. I've had opportunities to sit down with those nurses, Mr. Speaker, and be able to have that discussion on where we can make improvements within our healthcare system. I'm having another follow-up meeting this weekend, or this Friday, Mr. Speaker, with more nurses from emergency rooms to be able to hear their concerns directly. They certainly didn't feel hushed when they approached me and said, can we sit down and talk to you about how we can make things better in our emergency room? I said, absolutely, we will sit down. We have sat down. We have a follow-up meeting this week to be able to follow up on some of the issues that they have brought forward. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, these are serious concerns coming from nurses and healthcare workers who are on our front lines day in and day out. They have been clear about what they want to do. They want to sit down with that health minister and talk about the solutions that they have to the collapse in our healthcare system. Why won't he do it? Hear, hear.
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely ridiculous. They stand up and they read the questions that they have in order of number 1, number 2, number 3. I answered the question. I met with emergency room healthcare workers, nurses. There was an over 100 years of experience that I was sitting down at the kitchen table with these specific workers, 100 years of experience, Mr. Speaker, and they sat there. They had no issue with sitting down, providing me what their name was, and having a discussion. They didn't have any fear whatsoever. All they wanted to be able to is to be heard, Mr. Speaker, and for us to be able to act on some of the suggestions that they had brought forward. That's why I'm following up with them this Friday. We set the meeting 4 weeks ago. I'll follow up with them this Friday, and if we have to follow up in another 4 weeks, I'll do that again. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, this tired and out-of-touch government isn't listening anymore.
Your arrogance is showing.
But we're joined by a number of people today who hope this minister will listen, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They're calling on this government to introduce universal, no-cost coverage of contraception for all. It's an idea whose time has come. It will reduce unwanted pregnancies. It will increase independence and bodily autonomy. It will reduce costs in our healthcare system. It will bolster human rights. And it will save Saskatchewan people thousands of dollars every year. Will the minister listen to the advocates who have joined us here today and ensure universal, no-cost coverage of contraception for all?
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much. And again, I know the member's reading from her notes, Mr. Speaker, but in my introduction of those, I said I would meet with them right after question period, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, contraception options such as condoms are available at no cost to individuals across Saskatchewan from community-based organizations that this government funds. Mr. Speaker, what we have decided as government is we are going to focus in on high-end expensive drugs, Mr. Speaker. There are over 5,600 drugs that are on our formulary right now with a cost to the taxpayers of $388 million. Some of these drugs, which the members opposite have called for, Spinraza, or Cambie for cystic fibrosis, Mr. Speaker. Spinraza for spinal muscular atrophy. We also have Trikafta. We are investing, Mr. Speaker, by this government in life-saving drugs for individuals that are at a very high cost, and we're going to continue to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan women are struggling to make ends meet. Women make up more than half of our population. This is not a fringe request for a few people in our province. This is over half of our population. Bringing in universal no-cost coverage of contraception won't just lead to better health outcomes, it will also help save women thousands of dollars. Contraception isn't cheap, Mr. Speaker. An IUD can cost as much as $600. Birth control pills are at least $20 per month or more, and hormonal implants or injections can cost hundreds every year. Doesn't this minister agree that now is the time to give Saskatchewan women a break and stop forcing them to pay out of pocket for contraception?
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And again, as I've said before, we do have process where this government does fund community-based organizations to be able to pass out condoms to individuals, Mr. Speaker, and we also make sure that there is a connection between individuals and their health care providers so they can discuss safe contraceptive practices, Mr. Speaker. Some of the other investments that we've made, Mr. Speaker, on our drug plan, which we feel is critically important, is $61.4 million for the antiretroviral treatment for HIV and AIDS. This is a life-saving treatment, Mr. Speaker, and that's where we're going to focus our dollars on, and making sure that we're saving the lives of Saskatchewan people by the 5,600 drugs, the $388 million that we're investing in this, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to continue to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, free condoms simply don't cut it. Just ask the medical students from the University of Saskatchewan who have joined us here today and who are experts, along with the doctors who have joined us, who are calling for universal prescription contraceptive coverage, not just condoms. They formed the grassroots campaign, Universal Access to Contraceptive Saskatchewan, and here's what they have to say, Mr. Speaker, quote, "Contraception is a human right, and we in Saskatchewan should ensure that this right is no longer limited by prohibitive costs. Free universal prescription contraception would allow for exactly that." What does the minister have to say to these students who want to practice here in Saskatchewan and who want to see action from this government on universal prescription contraceptive coverage?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And again, I say to the students, I'm looking forward to having this discussion right after question period so I can hear from them directly on some of their concerns and I can inform them of some of the programs that we do have running in our province. As always, Mr. Speaker, if there's an opportunity to sit down and discuss with students, with healthcare workers, myself, the Minister of Rural and Remote, we're always available to have those discussions and continue those conversations to make sure that we're continuing to improve our healthcare system. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, we are also joined here today, as I mentioned earlier, by Dr. Christine Lett and Dr. Sally Mahood. These doctors see every day how the lack of access to prescription contraception is hurting women in our province. Dr. Lett sent a letter to the Sask Party government's health minister in 2019, 4 years ago, where she laid out for him that universal no-cost contraception would lead to improved health equity, a 7-fold return on investment, fewer unwanted pregnancies, and an increased uptake in effective contraceptive methods, Mr. Speaker. But still, just last week, this health minister said the government is not looking to make any changes to coverage. If the minister won't get on board with this proposal, Mr. Speaker, can he tell us which of those outcomes it is that he exactly opposes?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, and again, I thank the doctors for joining us here today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I do look forward to sitting down and having a discussion directly with them on these issues. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, we don't need another 4 years of conversations. What we need is action from this government today. Mr. Speaker, joining us as well in our call today is Caitlin Cottrell. Caitlin is the Executive Director for Saskatoon Sexual Health, and this is what she has to say about the need for universal access. Quote, "At Saskatoon Sexual Health, we regularly see the negative outcomes of the underperformance of our healthcare system, particularly when it comes to the lack of funded universal access to contraceptive medications and devices. Poor women, young women, racialized women, women with disabilities, and single moms are the ones who have the least access to contraception options, and they're the ones who would benefit the most from universal no-cost coverage of prescription contraception. So instead of just condoms, why won't the minister get on board and commit to this no-brainer of a measure today?"
I recognize the Minister of Health.
It's always interesting, Mr. Speaker. On one hand, they say we should do consultations and work with individuals, and now they're saying make snap decisions on this legislative floor without having any consultation with anybody like the SMA and other organizations, Mr. Speaker. I have committed, I'll commit again, because I know they've probably got a couple of more questions written down over there, and they got to get through them, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But I will sit down with this group and be able to have a discussion with the students as well as the doctors.
Order. The member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, yes, consultations are important, but the minister doesn't need to reinvent the wheel here. Many countries already offer universal access to no-cost contraception. And the government of BC announced just in their spring budget that they will be introducing universal no-cost coverage for everyone who needs it. Saskatchewan wouldn't be the first province, but it could be the second. Mr. Speaker, we could be leaders here in Saskatchewan. Why won't the minister sign on and make this a reality for Saskatchewan women?
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the member's question, we are leaders, Mr. Speaker. We have 5,600 drugs that are on our drug formulary that have coverage, Mr. Speaker. $388 million. That is significant dollars that we as a government have invested. And the majority of those are life-saving drugs, Mr. Speaker, such as cancer treatment, such as Trikafta, such as HIV and AIDS treatments, Mr. Speaker. These are ones that are critically important to the people of Saskatchewan to make sure that they can stay alive, Mr. Speaker, and contribute back to their communities. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to fund this, Mr. Speaker, at $388 million, which is a significant dollar amount, 5,600. I think we're leading the country in that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government should be laser-focused on helping families that are struggling with the crushing cost of living, but instead they're failing to deliver. All while Saskatchewan people struggle more to pay their bills than anywhere else in Canada. And yesterday's inflation numbers show that Saskatchewan has the second highest rate of inflation in Canada. How can that finance minister defend failing to do anything new in this budget to help families struggling with the crushing cost of living?
I recognize the Minister of Trade and Export.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Of course, inflation is largely a result of federal policy. Provincial governments have very few tools to deal with inflation. I'm happy to go into the details on the reasons for that, Mr. Speaker, but it has to do with the rate of the money supply growing quicker than the rate of goods being produced in the economy in a macro sense, Mr. Speaker. That is entirely to do with the Federal Bank of Canada on the money supply side. That being said, Mr. Speaker, the economy is performing very, very well, and we got some more wonderful news today, Mr. Speaker, really a testament to the job creators, the entrepreneurs, and those who are making investments here in this province. And that number, Mr. Speaker, is with regard to urban housing starts. Today, over the course of the last 3 months, the first 3 months of this year, we saw a 53% increase, Mr. Speaker, in housing starts in this province. That is not only in the top part of Canada, Mr. Speaker, that is leading Canada. Look forward to answering more economic questions going forward.
I recognize the member from Regina Rosemont, but I will remind members, I'll call the time. They don't have to. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the minister never even touched the question, and he's trying to pretend that the biggest tax hike in Saskatchewan's history, piling on with more bills, doesn't impact people's cost of living. It's ludicrous, Mr. Speaker. It's just how out of touch that government has fallen. We see the inflation numbers from last year, Mr. Speaker, last month, second worst in Canada, Mr. Speaker. We know that this Premier has the worst job creation record in all of Canada. It makes matters worse. 52% of Saskatchewan families say they're in bad shape or terrible shape and barely getting by financially. But there's zero cost of living relief in this budget, no new measures, just more fees and hikes for families that are facing so much. Why is this government failing to deliver any new cost of living relief for families facing some of the highest inflation in the country, and instead just add more cost to the hardworking people of this province?
I recognize the Minister of Trade and Export.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the members opposite try and take every opportunity to attack the economy and talk it down as best they can, Mr. Speaker. But the reality is the biggest threat that we have to this economy, inflation being one of those matters, Mr. Speaker, is to do with federal policy, to do with the policy of Justin Trudeau, the Liberal government, and his coalition partner, Jagmeet Singh, Mr. Speaker. Members opposite over there take offense when we say that somehow they should be, that they're aligned with Jagmeet Singh. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have in my possession here today a document that shows that to be the case. And this is a document from the NDP, Mr. Speaker, advertised by the member for Saskatoon-Newtana when the leader of the NDP was here, Jagmeet Singh, last week. What did he do, Mr. Speaker? He had a fundraiser with those members opposite, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering, though, I have a question for those members. When they attended that fundraiser with Jagmeet Singh, whether they put to Jagmeet Singh whether he was going to drop his support for Justin Trudeau, whether he was going to drop his support for the carbon tax, whether he was going to drop his...
Again, I'll remind members, I'll call the time. I don't want to hear that again. I recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, I know our leader's been crystal clear on these issues, clear with any of those leaders in Ottawa, Mr. Speaker, that we stand up for Saskatchewan's interests, Mr. Speaker. But you know, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation said yesterday there's nothing in this budget to make life more affordable, and they're right. Nothing to lower the fees and tax hikes brought in by this tired and out-of-touch government, that grandstanding minister, Mr. Speaker. Nothing to provide relief for the power and energy bill hikes this government keeps imposing on Saskatchewan people, and nothing to undo the damage and cost brought by the PST that they stuck on construction labour. This tired and out-of-touch government has brought in dozens of tax hikes and fees, the biggest tax hike in Saskatchewan's history. How is it that the minister couldn't find a single measure to roll back and offer the people of this province some relief?
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Minister of Finance.
It's interesting with the dramatic effects that the member opposite has on how our taxes are so horrific, when in fact, if you turn to the budget document, we are the most affordable province in Canada for a family of four, Mr. Speaker. It's on page 70 and 71. But yesterday he said in one of his questions, he said, you know, Manitoba dropped their personal income tax. Why don't we do so? Well, let's just take a look at that. Manitoba, an individual, pays tax right after he pays anything more than $15,000 in income. What is it in Saskatchewan? $17,661, Mr. Speaker. So in Saskatchewan, you get $2,661 more dollars tax-free than the province that member was promoting. What about the spouse, Mr. Speaker? Well, the spouse in Manitoba starts paying taxes after $9,134. What is it in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker? Well, it's $17,661, Mr. Speaker. That is just about $8,000.
Next question, please. I recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, the quote was from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation yesterday that she's debating. This government keeps raising SaskPower and Sask Energy bills. This despite our calls to scrap those rate hikes and despite the fact that that government's sitting on windfall revenues. Scrapping those rate hikes for families and businesses is the least that government could do to help. Why can't they do just that? Honestly, how have they fallen so out of touch with Saskatchewan people and families?
I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I would just like continue because again, yesterday the member opposite was bragging about New Brunswick and how they gave tax cuts and we don't compare. What does an individual pay? When does an individual in New Brunswick start paying income tax? Well, at $12,458. What is that individual in Saskatchewan? They get $17,661 tax-free before they pay provincial tax. What about that person in New Brunswick? What about their spouse? Well, after $9,764, they start paying provincial tax. What does that spouse in Saskatchewan get to make before they pay income tax? $17,661. So that member is toting these other provinces. We have already reduced taxes, that's in each and every budget, substantially to be one of the lowest personal income tax in the nation.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Centre.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency and in First Nation communities across the province, the overdose crisis continues to take lives. We've lost more Saskatchewan people to overdose this year than we did in all of 2016 and 2017. We need to see a real plan to stop the pain, address the trauma, and heal our communities, and not the 4-point plan that this government has. When will the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions finally act and bring forward a plan to save lives and reduce the number of overdoses?
I recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is very concerned about the overdose situation in this province, and is why we're working very closely, Mr. Speaker, to try to find solutions to this very complex issue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're committing to a number of new initiatives to build upon previous initiatives for both treatment but also prevention. Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget, new investments in this area include...
Please let the member answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, we're increasing funding for more addictions treatment spaces, Mr. Speaker, more funding for prevention, more funding for take-home naloxone programs, more funding for mobile harm reduction services, for rapid access to addictions medicine clinics, Mr. Speaker, in amongst a number of other investments this government has already made and will continue to make, Mr. Speaker.
Ministerial statements. Oh, pardon me. Why is the member on her feet?
Point of order, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
And what's your point of order?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Minister of Health was quoting from a memo that we have not seen. I'm wondering if he could table it pursuant to Rule 52.
As the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just spoke with the Minister of Health. He doesn't have the memo with him right now, but he will table it in the Assembly.
Thank you. Ministerial statements. Introductions of bills.
Item number 1, the Honourable Mr. Duncan.
I recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill number 134, the Education Amendment Act 2023, be now introduced and read a first time.
It has been moved by the Minister of Education that Bill number 134 be now introduced and read a first time. Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
First reading of this bill.
When shall the bill be read a second time? I recognize the Minister of Education.
Next sitting of the House.
Just do another bill. Next sitting.
Item number 2, the Honourable Mr. Duncan.
I recognize the Minister of Education.
I move that Bill. Bill number 135, the Education Consequential Amendments Act 2023, be now introduced and read a first time.
It has been moved by the Minister of Education that Bill number 135 be now introduced and read a first time. Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
First reading of this bill.
When shall this bill be read a second time? I recognize the Minister of Education.
Next sitting.
Next sitting. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Orders of the day. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd request leave to move a number of motions of condolence.
The Premier has asked for leave to move a number of motions of condolences. Is leave granted? Leave has been granted. I recognize the Premier.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to colleagues. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and express its grateful appreciation of the contribution he made to his community, to his constituency, and to the province. Brian Harvey Bjarnason, who passed away on September the 8th of 2022 at the age of 98 years old. He was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 1964 until 1969, where he represented the constituency of Kelvington for the Liberal Party. Mr. Bjarnason was born on April 2, 1924 in Dana, Saskatchewan, and lived most of his life in Leslie and Foam Lake. He enlisted in the Royal Canadian Air Force in December of 1942 at the age of 18 years old, and he trained across the prairies before graduating and receiving his pilot's wings in March of 1944. He went on to serve with the RCAF, number 354 Squadron, in India, flying missions off the Burma coast. In 1947, he married his wife Evelyn, and the two spent 66 years together until her passing in 2013. Prior to becoming an MLA, Mr. Bjarnason worked as a real estate agent and an insurance representative. And after selling his general insurance business in 1967, he sold life insurance with Mutual Life Canada and remained a financial advisor until he retired at the age of 70. Mr. Bjarnason was greatly involved with his community, holding a leadership role in the Canadian Legion and establishing a cadet corps in his local area. He was also a member of the Elks Lodge, the Masonic Lodge, and the Foam Lake Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Bjarnason is survived and sadly missed by his children, Sveva, Arnie, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to the members of the bereaved family. I so move.
Would the House take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would like to take this opportunity to join with the Premier on behalf of the official opposition in expressing our condolences to the family of Mr. Bjarnason, and also to thank the family for their service and for his service to their province. He served, as had been mentioned, not just as an elected member of the Assembly, as an MLA, but also as a service member with the Royal Canadian Air Force number 354 Squadron. Again, our condolences and sympathy to his family.
I recognize a member from Kelvington-Wadena.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join the Premier and the member opposite in acknowledging the work of Mr. Bjarnason as a member of this chamber, and thank him for his service to the community throughout his life, and again thank his family for supporting him throughout those endeavors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and express its grateful appreciation of the contribution he made to his community, to his constituency, and to the province. Charles Louis Woodbine Draper, who passed away on January the 14th of 2023, at the age of 87 years. He was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 1991 until 1995, and he represented the constituency of Assiniboia-Gravelbourg for the New Democratic Party. Born in Wallasey, England in 1935, Dr. Draper studied medicine at the University of Glasgow, graduating in 1961, and subsequently undertaking postgraduate training in surgery. After a time spent practicing tropical medicine in Lagos, Nigeria in 1965 and 1966, he immigrated to Saskatchewan, where he established a family practice in La Flèche and served as the Chief of Staff at the La Flèche Union Hospital. He relocated to Gravelbourg in 1976 and became Chief of Staff at the St. Joseph's Hospital. He later served as the town's alderman from 1978 until 1985 and mayor from 1985 until 1991. Dr. Draper was deeply involved in his community, serving as a member of the South Country District Health Board, president of the La Flèche and District Music Festival Association, a Fellow of the Royal Geographic Society, Senior Life Member of the Saskatchewan and Canadian Medical Associations, and many more. He was a Shriner at the Wawa Temple, Master of the Woodrow Masonic Lodge, a Lions Club member, a Steward of the United Church of Canada, and he also authored 4 books and numerous medical articles. In 1992, Dr. Draper was awarded the Canada 125 Medal for his contributions to society, followed by the Saskatchewan Centennial Medal in 2005. Upon his retirement, he moved to Lumsden before eventually settling in Regina, where he continued to work part-time at a medical clinic well into his 80s. Dr. Draper is survived and sadly missed by his wife, Patricia, and his children, Ingrid, Adrian, Natalie, Daryl, and Tracy, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to the members of the bereaved family. I so move.
Would the House take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join with the Premier on behalf of the official opposition in expressing our condolences to the family of Mr. Draper and thank him and his family for his service to the province. Also thank him for his work, the many years he spent, many decades he spent as a dedicated doctor in Saskatchewan, most notably in La Flèche and Gravelbourg. He also served, as had been mentioned, in multiple levels of government as an alderman and mayor, in addition to his many volunteer positions. Again, on behalf of the official opposition, we send our deepest condolences and sympathy to his family.
I recognize the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Dr. Louis Draper passed away at the age of 87 on January 14th of this year, and much has been said earlier, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Born in Wallasey, England on June 1st, 1935. Obviously, he got his education and moved to and started a family practice in La Flèche. One thing he also did, Mr. Deputy Speaker, examiner of the College of Family Physicians of Canada in Moose Jaw as well, Mr. Speaker. One thing I do know about Dr. Draper, living in our constituency, he was very passionate about rural hospitals and healthcare, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thank you.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt a motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and expresses its grateful appreciation of the contribution she made to her community, to her constituency, and to her province. Doreen Ellen Hamilton, who passed away on December the 2nd, 2022 at the age of 71, was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 1991 until 2007. Representing the constituency of Regina-Wascana Plains for the New Democratic Party. Ms. Hamilton served on Executive Council as Minister of Saskatchewan Liquor and Gaming, Minister responsible for the Saskatchewan Property Management Corporation, the Public Service Commission, and the Wascana Centre Authority, and Minister responsible for the status of women. She also served as a Deputy Speaker of the Assembly from 2005 until 2007. Born on May the 17th of 1951, Ms. Hamilton attended the Central Collegiate in Regina before earning an Education Standard A certificate from the University of Regina. She spent several years as an elementary school teacher before embarking on a career in civic politics. She was elected to the Regina City Council in 1985, where she sat on many boards and committees. She also served as the city's interim mayor for a time in 1988. Outside of the legislature, Ms. Hamilton was actively involved in her community. She was a member of the Broadway United Church. She taught Sunday school and served as a program director of the Lumsden Beach Camp for many years. She also served on the Boot Hill Community Association, establishing the first preschool program in 1982. In 2005, she received a Saskatchewan Centennial Medal for her contributions to the province. Ms. Hamilton is survived and sadly missed by her husband Bob and her children, Noelle and Amber, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to members of the bereaved family. I so move.
Would the House take the motion as... Oh, pardon me. Would the House take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join with the Premier on behalf of the official opposition in expressing our deepest condolences to all of the family of Doreen Hamilton and thank her for her service to her province. Now, Doreen had been a constituent of Regina Douglas Park for quite a long time, and as a constituent, I had the opportunity to get to know her over the past several years. She would often reach out with a note of encouragement as well as questions about the family, and I always very much appreciated her wisdom and her advice that she would share with me. She was truly a trailblazer ahead of her time as a woman in politics, most notably serving, as had been mentioned, as Regina's first woman mayor in Regina. Although it was interim, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do believe she opened the door for what we are now experiencing as Regina's first elected mayor. Several of my colleagues, as well as myself, had the honor of attending her funeral, and it was truly a privilege to share in the stories and the memories of Doreen and hear about what a force she truly was around this Legislative Assembly and around the caucus table. Doreen remained active in her community and very steadfast in her faith throughout the entirety of her battle with cancer. As I've already mentioned, on behalf of the official opposition, truly we extend our condolences and our sympathy to her family.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and express its grateful appreciation of the contribution that he made to his community, to his constituency, and to the province. Jerry Alvin Hammersmith, who passed away on December the 19th of 2021 at the age of 83. He was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 1978 until 1982, representing the constituency of Prince Albert Duck Lake for the New Democratic Party. Mr. Hammersmith served on Executive Council as the Minister of Northern Saskatchewan. Born in Melfort in 1938, Mr. Hammersmith grew up in Gronlid and had an extremely varied early career, working as a logger, a miner, a painter, a SAS power lineman, a bush pilot, and an outfitter. After earning a Bachelor of Education degree from the University of Saskatchewan in 1968, followed by a Master's of Education degree in 1971, he focused his work as an educator and a policy consultant on Indigenous and Northern populations across Canada and internationally. He taught at universities in Saskatchewan and New Zealand, as well as in First Nations forums, the Gabriel Demont Institute and the Demont Technical Institute. Mr. Hammersmith played an important role in the development of Indigenous education in Saskatchewan, acting as a consultant in the planning, the implementation, and the development of the Saskatchewan Indian Cultural Centre, the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies, and the initial planning for the Saskatchewan Indian Federated College, which is now First Nations University of Canada. Later in life, Mr. Hammersmith studied at the University of South Africa, where he completed a Doctor of Education in 2007. In addition to conducting research, he wrote both fiction and nonfiction, publishing a textbook in 2010 and a novel in 2018. Mr. Hammersmith is survived and sadly missed by his wife Joan and his children and stepchildren, Shannon, Renee, Jody, Jennifer, and Justin, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to the members of the bereaved family. I would so move.
Thank you. Would the House take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to join with the Premier in expressing our condolences on behalf of the official opposition to the family of Mr. Hammersmith, and also to thank him and his family for their service to their province. As had been mentioned by the Premier, Mr. Hammersmith had a very lengthy and very interesting and exciting career, but I wanted to particularly note and thank him for the work that he did with Indigenous communities around the province, in particular his role in founding what is the SIIT and now the FNUC. Mr. Deputy Speaker, once again, on behalf of the official opposition, we'd like to extend our deepest condolences and sympathy to the family of Mr. Hammersmith.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and expresses its grateful appreciation of the contribution that he made to his community, to his constituency, and to his province. Thomas, or Tom, Homer Keeping, who passed away on June the 10th, 2020, at the age of 78. He was a member of this Assembly, this Legislative Assembly, from 1991 until 1995, representing the constituency of Nipawin for the New Democratic Party. Mr. Keeping was born in Nipawin on April 12, 1942, and raised on his family's farm near Garrick. He worked as a farmer for much of his life, working cattle on horseback and growing crops. Over the years, he also cut timber and pulpwood, worked in a copper mine, worked in animal health for the federal government, and managed a community pasture for 8 years. In the 1990s, Mr. Keeping sold his cattle herd and entered politics, winning a seat in the Legislative Assembly in 1991. And upon his departure from the Assembly in 1995, he returned to farming on a smaller scale. Mr. Keeping also served as Reeve of the rural municipality of Torch River for several years before retiring and moving to Powell River, British Columbia. Mr. Keeping is survived and sadly missed by his partner, Mary, and his sons, Dave and Don, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to members of the bereaved family. I would move.
Thank you. Would those take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join with the Premier in expressing our condolences on behalf of the official opposition to the family of Mr. Keeping, and to also thank him and his family for their service to this province. As had been noted by the Premier, he spent a long part of his working life connected to the land through farming, and later, although he moved away, he was still very much connected to this province and the land in the province through his children and grandchildren, which would always bring him back. Again, on behalf of the official opposition, we'd like to join with the Premier in expressing our deepest condolences and sympathy to his family.
I recognize the member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would like to offer my sincere condolences to the family of Thomas Keeping, to say to his partner Mary and sons, Dave and Don, that Thomas's life mattered. He gave much to the province, leaving his home to attend sessional duties. Thomas's duty to his community also gave him the fortitude to act as Reeve of the rural municipality of Torch River, before finally retiring after many years of public service. Tom's fondness for his rural community was evident in his passion for farming, in cattle and grain, managing a community pasture and working in the forestry sector. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the province was made a better place from Tom's involvement, passions and commitment for a job well done. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I recognize a member from Carrot River Valley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Tom Keeping was a very well-known person in the Nipawin area, and as you can see, not only did the farming end, but as many of us have done, he worked in other jobs also in the farming and the mining industry to be able to continue on farming. Then he got into politics, and like I said, he was a well-known person within the area and did what he could possibly do to help out his constituency. And after he was done with the provincial politics, then he went on to be, as the member from Saskatchewan River says, went on to be the reeve for Torch River. So he was a very, very well-liked person who did a lot of work in his community. Then he moved out to British Columbia, but let's face it, he still had to come back to Saskatchewan, our great province, to see his boys and to go hunting and fishing, because we all know Saskatchewan is better than British Columbia. I just had to throw that in, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But we certainly offer our condolences to his family and his sons who still live in the Nipawin constituency, or Nipawin area. Thank you.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, pardon me, I would move that this Assembly records with great sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and express its grateful appreciation of the contribution that he made to his community, to his constituency, and to the province. Peter Myron Kowalski, who passed away on June the 8th of 2022 at the age of 80. He was a member of this Assembly, this Legislative Assembly, from 1986 until 2007, representing the constituencies of Prince Albert and Prince Albert Carleton for the New Democratic Party. Mr. Kowalski served as the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly from 2001 until 2007. Mr. Kowalski was born in North Battleford on July the 11th, 1941, and after completing high school, he studied at the University of Saskatchewan, obtaining a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Education, and a postgraduate diploma in curriculum studies. Mr. Kowalski then embarked on a 24-year career in education, teaching and serving as vice principal at high schools in Quill Lake, Unity, and North Battleford until his election to the Legislative Assembly in 1986. Mr. Kowalski was active in his community from a young age, belonging to Sea Cadets, the 4-H Club, the Yevshin Dancers, and the Ukrainian Orthodox Youth of Canada, or the CYMK organization. As an adult, he sat on 2 regional library boards, was a board member of the Lions Club, and was active with the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation, both locally as well as provincially. Deeply committed to his Ukrainian heritage, Mr. Kowalski was an active member of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church community, singing in the choir and serving on the boards of the Ukrainian Self-Reliance Association, or the TYC, and the Ukrainian Museum of Canada. In 1994, he published a book tracing the history of Saskatchewan MLAs with Ukrainian backgrounds like himself. Throughout his life, he made a number of trips abroad as both an educator and a legislator, helping train teachers in Ukraine and the Gambia with Project Overseas, and working as an election observer in Ukraine. Mr. Kowalski is survived and sadly missed by his wife of 57 years, Olesia, their 2 daughters, Lisa and Lara, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to the members of the bereaved family. I would move.
The House take the motion as read. Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to join with the Premier in expressing our condolences on behalf of the official opposition to the family of Mr. Kowalski, and also to thank the family for their service and thank Mr. Kowalski for his service to this province. As had been mentioned by the Premier, Mr. Kowalski had been re-elected 4 times into this Legislative Assembly, and he served in many roles, including government whip and various committees, and then eventually as Speaker, where he was both elected in 2001 and re-elected in 2004, which isn't always an easy feat to get re-elected into that role, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And as you well know, some of his rulings are still used as precedents to this day. So in many ways, he still lives on, looms large in this Assembly. Mr. Deputy Speaker, once again, I would like to take this opportunity to join with the Premier in extending condolences and deepest sympathy to the family.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and express its grateful appreciation of the contribution he made to his community, to his constituency, and to the province. Harold Arthur Martins, who passed away on January the 8th of 2023 at the age of 81 years. He was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 1982 until 1995, representing the constituency of Morse for the Progressive Conservative Party. Mr. Martin served on Executive Council as Associate Minister of Agriculture and Food. Mr. Martins was born on September the 8th, 1941 in Herbert, Saskatchewan, and he grew up on a ranch along the Swift Current Creek. After completing his education, he became a rancher himself, in partnership with two of his siblings and their families. Prior to his time in the legislature, Mr. Martins had a long and distinguished career in local government, serving as a councillor and then as a reeve for the rural municipality of Saskatchewan Landing and sitting on the board of directors for the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities. In 1977, he received the Queen's Silver Jubilee Medal for his contributions to local government. In 2003, Mr. Martins moved off the ranch into Swift Current, but he remained heavily involved with his community, serving as reeve of the rural municipality of Excelsior from 1991 to 2022. He held various leadership positions within his church, connected with producers in the southwestern part of Saskatchewan as a farm equipment salesman, and led or served on many committees and boards, some of which include the South Saskatchewan River Watershed Stewards, the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association, the Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and the Brand Inspection Services Advisory Committee. Mr. Martins is survived and sadly missed by his wife of 56 years, Sylvia, and their children, Tony, Chad, and Joe, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathies to the members of the bereaved family. I would move.
Did the House take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join with the Premier in expressing our condolences on behalf of the official opposition and also to thank Mr. Martins and the family of Mr. Martins for their service and his service to their province. I'd also like to thank him for his service to his community in many different levels, as has been described, of government, both as councillor, then reeve, as well as serving on the board of SARM, and then once again reeve up until 2022. Mr. Deputy Speaker, once again, we join with the Premier in expressing our condolences and deepest sympathy to his family.
I recognize the member from Swift Current.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As was mentioned in the Premier's remarks, Mr. Martins was a resident of Swift Current the past number of years, and I got to know him very well in my role as the MLA, and he provided me with countless opportunities to provide advice. I know he did to the previous MLAs as well, and to other MLAs around Southwest Saskatchewan. A continued and strong advocate for rural issues, as we heard the Premier talk about, and Harold did that right up until this winter. I recall receiving texts from Harold about issues when it came to farm and ranch across Saskatchewan, and right up until nearly his passing. Mr. Speaker, he continued to advocate for that, as we've heard. Anyone that knew Harold probably recalls his cane and his limp that he had, and I'm not sure how many people, as we learned at the funeral service, that that was a result of a hockey injury. Harold was a passionate hockey player. He was a center iceman, and an injury forced him to no longer be able to play center, and instead he took up goal. And I think based on some of the hockey I saw last night, there's probably a few NHL teams that could have used Harold Martins in goal last night. And he played that with the same sort of passion and dedication that he committed to towards agriculture issues. As we've heard, he was a salesman as well. And that's where I think some of the passion for communication and advocating and meeting with constituents and being a strong advocate for the people that he represented then led to his passion for politics, Mr. Speaker. To Harold's wife, Sylvia, to his sons, Tony, Chad, and Joe, his brother, Gordon Martins, and her wife, his wife, Sonia, his sister, Julie Tchaikovsky, and her husband, Kurt, and all of their families, and the many grandchildren. To all of those who knew and loved Harold, we extend our deepest sympathies.
I recognize the member from, where are you from? Cypress Hills.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to also acknowledge Mr. Harold Martins. Harold and I go way back. It's back when I was just a young guy and we were dabbling in provincial politics back in the 80s. And we worked on many committees, whether it was the Watershed Authority, SAS Stock Growers. He was a director with SARM when they had the director structure. And Harold was a wealth of knowledge. He was a pillar of the Southwest, if I have to say so myself, because you know, you could sit down and he was a kind of a calming soul. He's a larger gentleman, big, but he was a person that could lead. And, you know, with Harold and his family, like Sylvia, I've known her for as long as I've known Harold, but as was mentioned earlier, it was his one limp, the limp that he had. People went, what happened, Harold? But he was passionate about hockey. He was a flyer when he'd get wet and then he hurt himself. But you know, ranching was his passion. He was also in sales. He sold equipment across the Southwest and other parts of Saskatchewan. He is missed, and he's going to be hard to replace as a leader. And he was in here in the Ledge for a number of years. But you know, it's when people like this move on in life, as a journey, it does happen. They're big shoes to fill. So, I'd just like to acknowledge the passing of Harold. You know, and their families. So
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and express its grateful appreciation of the contribution that he made to his community, to his constituency, and to the province. Gordon Beatty Martin, who passed away on October the 4th of 2022 at the age of 90, was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 1986 until 1991, representing the constituency of Regina-Wascana for the Progressive Conservative Party. Mr. Martin served on Executive Council as Minister of the Family, Minister responsible for seniors, Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism and Recreation, as well as Minister of the Environment and Public Safety. Mr. Martin was born in Regina on March the 10th, 1932, and prior to his time in the legislature, he spent 25 years working in television and radio, most of them with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. His career as a sports broadcaster took him all across the world, where he covered sporting events such as the Canada Games, the Commonwealth Games, and the Olympics. Mr. Martin was deeply involved with his community, playing football with the Regina Rams, helping form the Saskatchewan Water Ski Association, and serving as a member of the George Reed Foundation, the Saskatchewan Sports Hall of Fame, the Saskatchewan Wildlife Foundation, and more. For his service, he was honoured by the Royal Life-Saving Society, the Canadian Wrestling Association, the National Volleyball Association, and the National Advisory Council on Fitness and Amateur Sport. Mr. Martin is survived and sadly missed by his wife, Louise, and his daughters, Leanne, Lorraine, Leslie, and Denise, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to members of the bereaved family. I would move.
Will the House take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join with the Premier on behalf of the official opposition in expressing our deepest condolences to the family of Mr. Martin, as well as to thank him and his family for their service to their province. I'd like to thank him for his service as MLA for 5 years in Regina Wascana, which is partly now known as Regina Douglas Park, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As had already been described, he had a distinguished career in broadcasting, covering a number of high-profile events, including the Olympics. A truly very interesting career that Mr. Martin had. Once again, on behalf of the official opposition, we'd like to join in with the Premier in extending our deepest condolences and sympathies to the family.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and express its grateful appreciation of the contribution that he made to his community, to his constituency, and to the province. Alan Roy Oliver, who passed away on November the 24th, 2021, at the age of 85, was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 1971 until 1975, representing the constituency of Shaunavon for the New Democratic Party. Mr. Oliver was born on January the 8th, 1936, on his family farm near Crichton. He became a teacher after completing school and spent 17 years teaching in various locations throughout the province. Mr. Oliver was also a farmer in the Aneroid district, where he purchased land and established a home and farm with his wife, Jerry. He was passionate about the land and experimented with new crops, practices, and equipment over the years. In addition to teaching and farming, Mr. Oliver was very involved in his community, working as the reeve of the municipality of Auvergne. For more than 30 years, he served on numerous provincial agricultural committees and government boards during that period of time, including the Wheat Pool Committee and several local co-op boards. Mr. Oliver was also involved with the Lutheran Church, first in Admiral, where he was council chair for many years, and later at St. Olaf Lutheran Church in Swift Current. He served on a committee to form the Southwest Lutheran Parish by joining together several local congregations. Mr. Oliver is survived and sadly missed by his wife of 64 years, Jerry, and their children, Eric and Connie, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to members of the bereaved family. I so move.
Thank you. The Dallas take the motion as read. Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join with the Premier in expressing our condolences on behalf of the official opposition to the family of Mr. Oliver, and also to thank him and his family for their service to this province, as has already been mentioned and is common, I think, for many who we're talking about today and many who are elected into this House. Mr. Oliver served in multiple levels of government and working as a reeve as well for over 30 years, as well as numerous volunteer activities. It was clear that he was very committed and active in his community. Once again, on behalf of the official opposition, we extend our deepest condolences and sympathy to his family.
I recognize the member from Cypress Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to acknowledge Alan Oliver. I got to know Alan in my days and times. It seems like a while since I was on a board of SARM. And Alan was just a kind gentleman. He appreciated his community a lot, like Mr. Martin's, and was a leader, you know, in every means and way. He, like it was mentioned, that he was a teacher. Agriculture was a passion, and you know, you could sit down with Alan during convention, or even when we had joint meetings as RM councils and stuff, and Alan just brought a calming effect to, you know, sometimes when meetings get a little hectic and, you know, off the rail a bit. But, you know, he's going to be very much missed as a community leader and a person from the area of the Southwest. So just like to acknowledge Mr. Alan Oliver.
I recognize the Agriculture Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I just want to join my colleagues in passing on my condolences to the Alan Oliver family. Through all my years at SARM, I got to know Alan very well and work with him in a lot of different ways on municipal issues. And as my colleague said, Alan was a real gentleman, and he really was. And I had the greatest respect for Alan and the work he did in the rural municipal side of it. So I just want to pass along my condolences to his wife, Jerry, and their entire family, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt a motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and expresses its grateful appreciation of the contribution that she made to her community, to her constituency, and to the province. Jocelyn Sylvia Prefontaine, who passed away on November the 29th, 2022 at the age of 62, was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 2007 until 2011. She represented the constituency of Saskatoon-Sutherland for the Saskatchewan Party. Born on September the 15th, 1960, Ms. Prefontaine grew up and attended school in Montmartre, Saskatchewan. Following high school, she moved to Prince Albert to undertake training to become an emergency medical technician. She settled in Saskatoon in 1983, initially working EMS before becoming the first female firefighter for the Saskatoon Airport, and then in 1990, one of the first 10 female police officers of the Saskatoon City Police Service. Ms. Prefontaine went on to have a 25-year career in policing, serving variously in patrol as a school liaison officer and in the integrated drug unit before retiring as a detective sergeant. She received many awards for her work, including the International Chiefs of Police Award for Community Policing, a 2001 Educator of Distinction Award, and a Saskatchewan Centennial Medal for contributions to the province. Following her time in the legislature, she worked part-time as a community coroner before retiring altogether. Ms. Prefontaine is survived and sadly missed by her husband, Gary, her children, Elise and Jared, stepchildren Amanda, Luke, and Matthew, and each of their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to the members of the bereaved family. I would so move.
Thank you. Would the House take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join with the Premier in expressing our condolences on behalf of the official opposition to the family of Ms. Prefontaine, and also to thank her and her family for their service to their province. Now, I know there are many members on this in this chamber today who have a lot of experience and a lot of stories about with Ms. Prefontaine. I'm looking forward to hopefully hearing some of them. When I read her obituary this morning, I saw that she was quoted, or she was noted as being a pioneer for women in non-traditional roles. And Mr. Speaker, I think that description is incredibly apt in reading her background. First female firefighter for Saskatoon Airport, one of the first 10 female police officers in Saskatoon. She also won, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the International Chiefs of Police Award for Community Policing. I imagine she would have been an incredible force around the caucus table, and I'm sad that I didn't have the opportunity to get to meet her. Once again, on behalf of the official opposition, I'd like to extend our deepest condolences and sympathy to her family.
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join the Premier and the member opposite in supporting the motion of condolence for Jocelyn Prefontaine Schreimer. Jocelyn is a former Sask Party member of the Legislative Assembly from 2001 to 2011. Jocelyn grew up in the southeast part of Saskatchewan, where she enjoyed the rural lifestyle and excelling at every sport that she took on. In adulthood, Jocelyn later moved to Prince Albert, where she was trained and worked as an emergency medical technician until 1983. Jocelyn eventually settled permanently in Saskatoon, where she continued working as an EMS, emergency medical services field. Jocelyn was a trailblazer for women in a non-traditional role, becoming the first female firefighter at the Saskatoon Airport. In 1990, Jocelyn achieved her dream career as one of the first 10 female police officers in the city of Saskatoon. Jocelyn served 25 years policing while she worked on patrol, was a school liaison officer, and found her passion in the Saskatoon Integrated Drug Unit until eventually retiring as a detective sergeant. As a result of her work with the absentee assessment team, Jocelyn received the International Chiefs of Police Award for Community Policing. Jocelyn followed her retirement from the force and chose to enter the world of politics. She served in Saskatoon Sutherland constituency until she retired from politics in 2011. This constituency later became the one that I serve now in Saskatoon, Silver Springs, Sutherland. Following her career in politics, Jocelyn worked as part-time community coroner in the province of Saskatchewan. Jocelyn eventually chose to fully retire from public service so she could spend more time with her family. Her greatest supporters were her family. She was a loving wife, mother, grandmother, and a kind heart to all. Family meant a lot to her, and I understand in her retirement she chose to spend all of her retirement with her family. Jocelyn's achievements span decades, and she is an inspiration that young Saskatchewan women can look up to. Jocelyn is survived by her loving husband, Gary, her 2 children, Elise and Jared, 3 stepchildren, Amanda, Luke, Matthew, and her 7 grandchildren. I wish my sincere condolences to the family and the loved ones of Jocelyn. She will deeply be missed by all. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to make some very brief remarks about Jocelyn. I first met her when I was in opposition, and she was definitely a force to be reckoned with. They had a very active ride-along program with the Saskatoon City Police at that time, and I went along on the ride-along. That was where I first met her, was when I was paired with her for the ride-along, and it was a warm summer night and a very active summer night. And we barely got away from the police station when we got a call from an officer in distress, and it was like that for the whole night. We were incredibly busy, got to see parts of the city and actions that were taking place that I did not know existed. I'll share briefly one incident that happened. We were sent to break up a fight and a disturbance at an apartment complex, and I was worried because Jocelyn was shorter than I was, and I thought, what if I was called upon to help her? And was worried that I would not be anywhere close to being what was adequate. I soon realized that she was not going to need any help from me. There was a tall gentleman there that was somewhat intoxicated, wearing long, baggy, short pants. This was sort of the style at that time, and unsteady on his feet. And he wasn't really doing a whole lot, but Jocelyn was, and he was fumbling with the bottom of his shorts. And Jocelyn goes up to him and just takes him by the arm and gently says, "If I see Mr. Schnigley coming out of there, you are going downtown and spending the night in jail." I didn't even realize this was going on. So anyway, she goes and she finishes some of the other matters, and sure enough, within a few minutes later, she looks out of the corner. Sure enough, Mr. Schnigley had appeared. So she was able to grab the person, have him up against the wall, cuffed and sitting down before I was even aware of it. And she said, "I told you that was going to happen." So she finishes dealing with the rest of the people that were there, and she goes up to him and she says, "I see I haven't had any more problems for you. I'm going to take the cuffs off and I'm going to let you go home. But I warned you, just remember, watch for me again." So anyway, she took the cuffs off. The gentleman went on his way. But she was an incredibly caring individual. She was an amazing MLA for the things that she was committed to, wanted to, and as a police officer, committed to young people programs and wraparound programs that would serve the youth of our province and our city. So I will miss her as a friend, not just as a colleague, as an MLA, and want to wish deepest condolences to her family.
I recognize the member from New York then.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that might be a hard one to follow. I think anybody that served with Jocelyn had some pretty fond memories of her, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I was elected with her the same time in 2007 when we formed government, and we served on a lot of the same committees. We became friends quite quickly. I remember her and a former member that we recognized his passing a while back, Serge Leclerc. I was probably the voice of reason between the three of them half the time, which is probably surprising to some of my colleagues here, but just an amazing, amazing woman. As we've heard from especially the Premier and the member for Southern, the Minister of Health, she served in a lot of different ways. She served people throughout her career, as we heard, firefighter, but I know her experience as an EMS and specifically as a street cop, for the most part, really served her well, and she really brought those experiences and that wisdom to the caucus table, to the committee table. Mr. Deputy Speaker, was very valued and very wise information, and she always did lead with her heart. She seemed like a very tough cookie, and she was. She could really handle herself physically and debate, but she really was a soft-hearted person, Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, very sweet woman. Again, very wise and passionate, caring, and loving individual, Mr. Speaker. And sadly, you know, referring to her heart, it was her heart that eventually took her home to heaven. You know, she will be greatly missed by everybody that knew her. Again, I count her as a very close friend. It was very saddening to hear that she had passed, but I know she's with the Lord, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So my condolences to her family, all that knew her, and again, she will be greatly missed.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Pardon me. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and express its grateful appreciation of the contribution that she made to her community, to her constituency, and the province. Carol Tycroft, who passed away on December the 18th, 2022 at the age of 83, was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 1991 until 1999, representing the constituencies of Saskatoon River Heights and Saskatoon-Meewasin for the New Democratic Party. Ms. Tycroft served on Executive Council as the Minister of Family, Minister of Education, Minister responsible for the Saskatchewan Property Management Corporation, Minister of Education again, Training and Employment, Minister of Municipal Government, and Minister of Municipal Affairs, Culture and Housing. Born in Carrot River in 1939, Ms. Tycroft grew up in northeastern Saskatchewan. She had a diverse career prior to her time in the legislature, working as a court reporter, a bookstore owner, and a farmer, as well as a councillor and reeve of the rural municipality of Cormorant Park for 12 years. Ms. Tycroft was extremely involved in public life, serving variously as a director and chair of numerous organizations, including the Canadian Egg Marketing Agency, the Saskatchewan Turkey Producers Marketing Board, the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, the Saskatchewan Research Council, the Saskatoon Regional Health Authority Board, the Canadian Turkey Marketing Agency, and many more. In 1982, Ms. Tycroft received a Saskatoon YWCA Woman of the Year Award for her accomplishments, followed by a Rotary Club Award of Excellence for Commerce and Industry in 1990. In 2012, she was inducted into the Saskatchewan Agriculture Hall of Fame, and upon retiring, she relocated to British Columbia and started a Saskatoon berry farm. Ms. Tycroft is survived and sadly missed by her husband of 65 years, Dan, and their children, Lori, Sharon, and Jim, and their families. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathies to members of the bereaved family. I so move.
Will the House take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join with the Premier in expressing our condolences on behalf of the official opposition to the family of Ms. Tykrub, and also to thank her and the family for their service to their province. As has been mentioned already by the Premier and is not uncommon for those who serve in this House, Ms. Tykrub served in multiple levels of government, as well as including as councillor and a reeve of Corman Park for 12 years. In addition to that, she had a very diverse career, concluding, as had been mentioned, with a Saskatoon berry farm in BC. Someone who had worked for the party and had worked for her upon learning of her passing had described her as being someone who had, quote, entered politics because she wanted to do good things. She wanted to do the right thing. She wanted to make her community better and stronger, end quote. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I've already expressed, again, we join with the Premier in extending our condolences and deepest sympathy to her family.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's an honor to join with the Premier, our House Leader, and members from both sides of the House and support the motions of condolences today. It's an honor to stand in my place today and recognize and remember a very great MLA. Carol Tykrub served as the MLA in this House for almost 9 years, representing the great people of Saskatoon River Heights and then the riding of Saskatoon-Meewasin for the Saskatchewan New Democratic Party. During that time as an MLA, she served many roles in the executive government, as mentioned, leaving an indelible mark on our province through her stalwart public service. As I stand here today listening to all that she had accomplished, I am saddened to say that I had never met her. By all accounts, she was a strong advocate for her community in and outside of this House, which is telling by her recognition and being named as the Saskatoon YWCA Woman of the Year in 1982. And hearing her from her biography, it was also lovely to hear that Carol was also a small business owner, living out the small business dream of owning a bookstore, something we have in common, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Carol had recently actually also come up in conversation as I was preparing for budget estimates, as she too had been involved in liquor and gaming regulation during her time in government. Many connections to be had. I want to say a great thank you to the people of Saskatoon-Meewasin for putting their trust in Carol and sending her to this place over those years to do the work of this great province. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, lastly, we always say in this House that we do not serve alone, and I want to thank Carol's family for supporting her throughout her years of service. We are very sorry for your loss. We know that you will be so greatly missed. I join with my colleagues today to remember a great and express my most sincere sympathy and condolence to the bereaved family.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would move that this Assembly records with sorrow and regret the passing of a former member of this Assembly and expresses its grateful appreciation of the contribution he made to his community, to his constituency, and to the province. Edward Hazen Walker, who passed away on September the 26th, 2019 at the age of 96. He was a member of this Legislative Assembly from 1951 until 1956, representing the constituency of Gravelbourg for the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. Born in Mazanoid in 1923, Mr. Walker completed high school in his home community before attending the University of Saskatchewan. There, he earned a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture degree in 1945 and worked as a part-time instructor. Following his graduation, Mr. Walker purchased land in the Mazanoid district where he worked as a farmer. At the time of his election to the legislature in 1951, Mr. Walker had been active in the CCF for several years. His brother, Robert Walker, was also a CCF MLA, and following Edward's election, the brothers served side by side in the Assembly. Following his service as an MLA, he was elected Vice President of the Saskatchewan section of the CCF. Outside the legislature, Mr. Walker also served as a member of the Mazanoid Co-op Board of Directors, and in 1959, he married his wife, Grace, and the two spent 58 years together until her passing in 2017. Mr. Walker is survived and sadly missed by his dear friend Stella Campbell and members of his extended family. In recording its own deep sense of loss and bereavement, this Assembly expresses its most sincere sympathy to members of the bereaved family. I would so move.
Will the House take the motion as read? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to join with the Premier in expressing our condolences on behalf of the official opposition to the family of Mr. Walker, and also to thank the family as well as himself for their service to their province. As had been noted by the Premier, he served as a CCF MLA. Most interestingly, I thought, serving alongside his brother, which I think is something that I'm not sure if anyone else can lay claim to. Mr. Deputy Speaker, once again, on behalf of the official opposition, we would like to extend our deepest condolences and sympathy to his family.
Is the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would request leave to move a motion of transmittal.
The Premier has asked for leave to move a motion of transmittal. Is leave granted? Leave has been granted. I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, notwithstanding Rules 8-2 of the Rules and Procedures of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, the Speaker, on behalf of the Legislative Assembly, transmit copies of the official records of the tributes to the bereaved families in memory of the deceased members. I so move.
It has been moved by the Premier that notwithstanding Rule 8, subset 2 of the Rules and Procedures of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, the Speaker, on behalf of the Legislative Assembly, transmit copies of the official records of the tributes to the bereaved families in memory of their deceased members. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. Oops. I apologize. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In order to keep the committee's schedule as we had agreed to, we will dispense with adjourned debates today, and I will move that this House do now adjourn.
It has been moved that this House do now adjourn. Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt that motion? Carried. This House now stands adjourned till tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Pardon me, 10 a.m.